All right, so we're done now with the Critical Digital Literacies of Social Praxis book. And we're at the afterword, which is called So Now You Know, What Are You Going to Do About It by Margaret C. Hagood. And I wanted to assign this because I like these pieces that try to reflect over the whole book. And hopefully, as you're reading this, you might have had your own thoughts about what you gleaned from the text and what you would like to do after reading this, how this might change you, change some of your beliefs. And she opens this with a discussion of what I've summarized as too much freedom. So she says, despite all the mandates to corral teachers and students into functioning via the same parameters and outcomes, aka the one size fits all model, teachers actually have a great deal of autonomy about how to address digital literacies. We need to examine teachers themselves and the beliefs they hold about teaching, learning, and technology. Now, so on the one hand, it sounds like a good thing, right? As a teacher, you might have a lot of latitude about how you use technology, how much technology you use, what particular technologies. Sometimes you're forced to use a certain tool, but it seems like the norm, though, is to have more flexibility with this. And it's kind of up to an individual teacher how they go about this. So, for example, you might be mandated that you use a tool like Desire to Learn, but it's not mandated exactly how you should use that. So I've known some of the places I've taught, there was similar situations, and all the professors or all the teachers had to use the learning management system. But that could just mean you used it just for announcements and nothing else, right? Or maybe you just used it for grade book and nothing else. So it wasn't really specified. And of course, some teachers really got into it and they used all these features. They'd use the discussion boards, the blogs, the online quizzes and all this sort of stuff, and then others would just use it as minimally as possible, right? Or think about an email. You say, well, you're required to respond to student emails, but it's probably not specified what that means, what kind of responses, how should you be available. If a student emails you at midnight, should you respond to that immediately? Uh, people all over the board with those kind of questions, right? Uh, so that's the problem. If you've got no consistency with it, maybe you have a teacher that uses technology a lot, but he or she is only teaching the students the sort of how to use the how to stuff, right? So here's how to use it, but no critical element, no mindfulness of when would be the best time to use it, when should you not use it, etc. So this is a problem. And so I wanted to stop here and ask you this the second question. So she says, she's quoting somebody here. I didn't write down who she was quoting. But this idea about examining ourselves and our own beliefs about teaching, learning, and technology, and really recognizing this is an important question. These beliefs do have significance. Do you think of technology as something that's purely a hindrance and an obstacle, a distraction? I think that's not a very good belief to hold, but I also don't think it's a good belief to hold that the opposite, that all you have to do is add technology and stir. Right? So all we need is more computers, more devices, and that will somehow magically improve education. So I think the truth is obviously somewhere in the middle of that. Uh, and I've seen people too that gets a little too critical. So they're so critical of every technology. So I've heard, for example, well, we shouldn't allow students to use any technology, or shouldn't let them go online because some students don't have access to the internet at home. What they call it, the digital divide. And so the idea was it's not fair for some students to have this advantage and other students not to have that advantage. Or anytime a piece of software that could be very useful, but it costs some money, and so they say, well, we shouldn't use this because it's not free. So those are some examples, I think, where people are being a little too skeptical or a little too critical. Again, it's nice to find some kind of middle ground. In my experience, I try to use as much as possible free software, but I don't limit myself to that. Quite frankly, it's just I don't know if it's an advantage to a student to not teach them how to use things like Microsoft Word or what are some other ones? PowerPoint, for example. Things that they probably will have a lot of benefits, even though I do object to some of the uh, business practices behind that. So anyway, that's just a little bit about my beliefs. I want to hear about yours. So what are your beliefs now about teaching, learning, and technology in light of this CDL book? All right, then we have these 4 points to ponder, and these are all huge points to ponder. And you could write another book about any one of these, right? So the first one is just how do you define these things? What is digital literacies? That's a pretty big question. You're just talking about, again, functional. I used to see these computer literacy tests, are you computer literate? And there would be some questions there to answer. And it might be, do you know how to copy and paste? Do you know how to use Google search? Do you know how to, what are some others? How to edit a page in Wikipedia? Do you know how to make a YouTube video? Do you know how to make a PowerPoint presentation? So you could kind of go about it that way. But I think what we want to do with critical digital literacies is add another component. So it's not just do you know how to do it, but do you know how to do it mindfully, right? So are you aware of the sort of who you advantage and who's disadvantaged by the way you use these technologies? Are you aware of the sort of ideological, cultural hegemony, whatever you want to call it, dimensions to these tools? How are you contributing to an unjust society by using these things badly, not really thinking about what you're doing? So these are all huge questions, and I don't think it'd be hard to find people that have the exact same answer to what we mean by these things. Some people would say digital literacies implies a critical component, so you don't even need that critical word in there. Other people say you don't even need the digital. Just being literate in today's society automatically assumes a computer, how to use computers. So these are big controversial issues. 2, how do you bridge the gaps between CDL and functional or foundational literacies? I think my belief on this one is I don't like to see a lot of separation. I don't like the idea of a sort of, well, this class will teach you how to use it, and this class will teach you how to be mindful about it. I prefer a situation where you get both combined in the same class, where you're sort of learning how to use the tools at the same time you're learning about you're learning to be more critically aware of them. I like that approach, but people differ. 3, how should we alter the relationships between students and teachers engaged in CDL? So this point number 3 is the reason I wanted us to read the Ignorant Schoolmaster, which I think that book does a good job of really sort of challenging some of the basic assumptions we make. And you could also go to Free Air for this as well. So just thinking about that sage on a stage model teaching, or the guide on the side model, or as people say nowadays, that these millennials, they know so much about technology, they actually teach the teachers how to use the technology. That to me is almost as problematic, that assumption. But where's the what is the ideal relationship? Especially as we're moving into online teaching and these massively online open courses. What is the role of a teacher in those courses? If we don't want to think about the students as just being passive learners, right? But at what point have you given them too much responsibility for their own learning, right? The teacher needs to earn a paycheck, right? So what is the ideal relationship? And then 4, how can we plan for the future with these ideas in mind? And I think number 4 is, of course, critical as well. I've known many teachers, professors, and administrators that sort of put all their eggs in one basket. I remember when Second Life was a huge thing, and Minshew bought an island in Second Life, and there was all the scholarship coming out about it, and all these learning modules in Second Life, and there's a bunch of hype about it. Of course, it all fizzled out, and I could point to lots of other examples like that. Whereas other things that didn't get as much hype, like the Wikipedia, for example, a lot of skepticism about that. People actually banned its use, and people said there's no way this thing's going to go anywhere. It's a joke, the idea of a public encyclopedia that anybody can edit, and so on. And of course, the Second Life went nowhere, and Wikipedia is pretty much everywhere. So it's really hard to plan for these things. That's why I try to be skeptical of any sort of hype, and try to keep an open mind about something that at first seems ludicrous. Maybe it's ludicrous, maybe it's right to be incredulous, but on the other hand, try to keep enough of an open mind so you don't get left in the dust, so to speak, if it does take off. So anyway, I'm not going to ask you to ponder all of these points, but I would like you to choose at least one of these and just reflect on it for a while. And I'd like to know your thoughts. Okay, and then the last point. So to engage in CDL is to move from awareness to action. So it's one thing to be a problem pointer outer, as you might say, versus someone who actually can not only see some problems, but try to come up with solutions to those problems. I like to tell students that I never raise a problem that I can't solve myself, because that way I can position it as, here's a problem and here's my solution, and that looks pretty good on me, right? Versus somebody that just wants to make out like the sky is falling and there's nothing we can do about it. But anyway, I just wanted to ask you here, so after reading the CDL book, is there anything that you read there that really made you affect a change in your own teaching or learning practice? So moving just beyond being aware of it to actually doing something about it. Can you think of any examples like that? I'll just give you one example for me, because I've read this book before. And one of the things I decided to try to do this semester was to, instead of just having students respond in text form on the discussion board, I wanted to try to have them use videos and audio forms. For one, to get them more comfortable using those technologies, but also wanted to see if there would be different kinds of responses that would be generated when people were speaking into a microphone versus typing their answers out. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It made me a little more aware, I guess, of some of the differences between audio and textual responses that I might not have I had never even really thought about it before this semester. And now I'm much more aware of it. It's really just kind of fascinating. So that's one example from me, but I want to hear about you as well. So what's something you've done or might be planning to do in light of this book? So I think that'll do it for now. Appreciate you listening to this, and I will see you again soon.